Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung out and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday night, high up in Midtown. The Braves may be on the road, but we've got a little bit of baseball talk to get to you right here in Atlanta, and one more month to go as things continue to just tick on down the way that all seasons do, but unfortunately for the Braves, the 2025 season not quite ticking down in the manner in which they wanted. Because I think a lot of people would have circled a series like this, a weekend like this, Braves and Phillies, a rivalry that has been, I don't know, heated is one word for it, but maybe a little bit lopsided on the Phillies side when it comes to the postseason. Well, this is not going to be a year that really stems the tide for the Braves, or turns the tide, so to speak, as we kind of know where the Braves are, and we've gotten a big heaping helping of where exactly the Phillies are, and more importantly, I think where the Phillies are trying to get to. And we're going to talk about that, of course, on this show as we go along. But another week that is come and gone in baseball season. It is Labor Day weekend. I hope everybody out there has been able to enjoy a little bit of family time, a little bit of R&R. Maybe you're going to enjoy all that on Monday. Hopefully you do. Hopefully, if you do that, you're listening to From the Diamond, wherever you get your podcast. You can subscribe right there. If you do that, I would love if you would leave me a rating as well. That would be supremely, supremely helpful for me. And much appreciated in the long grind that is the Braves baseball season here in 2025. Any little thing that we can do to get ourselves down the road together sometimes is the best way to do it. A little bit of support, if you will. So I appreciate you supporting me as far as podcasts go and the subscriptions and the ratings and all of those things. And obviously, through the course of a long season that neither of us, or none of us, I should say, hopefully there's more than one person out there listening. But nothing that we can control as far as the baseball that we've been able to watch on the field. But what can we take from 2025? That's probably what we're going to spend a good portion of the month of September dealing with, is how exactly do you take a disappointing year, a lost season, and get something out of it that can propel you into 2026? And look, this is not the conversation anybody wants to have. I can promise you that. I mean, we've all gone through the different stages of grief, I guess, that you do as a fan and a follower of a baseball team or a sports team in general when the season's just not going your way. And to say that the 2025 Braves season has not gone their way would be putting it lightly, mildly. It would be the understatement of not only the show, but, of course, the season, because there have just been things that, have been inexplicable and unexpected, although I guess you expect the unexpected when it comes to injuries, but let's just put them in that box for now. And then also look at the fact that you have a team that has won before. It has figured out how to win in the regular season at a pretty good clip, despite some of the injuries and despite some of the underperformance. And I thought 2024 was going to be the test. I truly did. I thought that 2024 was going to be that season where the Braves kind of had that bend but don't break mentality. They got through it. They got to the postseason. It didn't last very long, but considering what they went through a year ago, I just kind of felt like, all right, there's that 1 year. There's that blip in the middle of this run where the Braves are just going to kind of have to figure it out, because that is what good clubs do, quite honestly. And when you do look at the 2025 Braves, even with a lot of the same pieces in place, you add a new left fielder, but then you have to subtract him for the first half of the season. You wait on your superstar right fielder to come back, and he has been able to show you that he can still be a superstar. I think Ronald Acuna Jr. has done that. But there have still been these tale of two halves type seasons for a guy like Michael Harris, a down season in general for Ozzie Albies. And when we go along on this show, one of the stories and one of the things I want to really get into is the Ozzie Albies comeback factor for 2026. Now, that comeback factor can have a couple of different applications to it, because there have been some people, based on how rough the season has been for him, that have questioned, do the Braves really want to bring this guy back? And I'll tell you this, because this doesn't really have any bearing on the discussion later, because obviously, the answer to this short story is yes, they owe him a $4 million buyout on a $7 million option. If I'm the Atlanta Braves, or really any baseball executive that's just trying to, parse through the pieces that I have to make my team as good as it can be, yeah, you want to look at everything. You do want to discuss everything. And as I've said time and again, and will continue to say over the course of the next month, so spoiler alert, the Braves need to have a lot of discussions over the course of the winter that will help guide them into what they hope will be a much better 2026, because they have some serious questions to answer. There is no disputing that. There is no way around that. You look at the performance, you look at the record, you look at what you expected and what you got, and you've got to figure out a way to get better where you can get better. And this will be the most challenging offseason for Alex Anthopoulos, I think, since he's taken over. And he's, I think, cleared some hurdles for this club. He's done some very good things for this team. And as you know, a GM's job is never done. And I think Alex would tell you that. From my conversations with him, from any time I hear him talking to basically anybody, I think he does understand the job. It doesn't mean it will come with an unlimited amount of resources, though there is a discussion to be had about, can the Braves put more resources into their club to help get them over this hump and out of this funk that they've been in this year? I think the answer to that one should be yes, just based on the business model, and I'll leave that right over there. But when you look it back and circle it back into the Ozzie Albies discussion, I mean, you don't want to be just penny wise and pound foolish when you make a decision about Ozzie Albies. I do think that there is a capability for a 28-year-old player, and so heading into his age, 29-year-old season next year, age 29 season, to be able to find what it is he's been able to do in the past, and you don't want him to figure it out somewhere else because you were trying to save $3 million. I guess that's my point here. And I'm going to get into some of the numbers, some of the metrics that I looked at that kind of gave me an idea of maybe where Ozzie Albies has been in 2025, in 2024, and where he was, say, in 2023, when he had one of the best seasons of his career. I mean, this is a guy that, offensively speaking, at that position has been a standout player. But can he get back there? That's one of the many questions the Braves, of course, are going to ask themselves. I think it's a question Ozzie Albies has been asking himself throughout the course of the year as well. I've heard Brian Snitker talk about this. You wouldn't know that this isn't a good year on the field for Ozzie because of everything that he's able to do for this club beyond that. Everything that he means to this team in the general sense that I think sometimes gets lost in the discussion and the discourse of, all right, well, everybody wants to see results. And I can tell you that the players, I mean, they have expectations too. They want to see the results. And Ozzie Albies knows this has not been the season with the results that he has wanted to show. This has not been a season, though, where, knock on wood, he's had to deal with numerous broken bones. 2024 was. It was one of those. A couple of years ago, 2022, he had to go through this whole thing again as well. So Ozzie's, I think, just one of the many pieces that the Braves are going to have to figure out where he fits on the board. And maybe there's an adjustment of expectations just based on the recent performance for where you look to make your lineup a little bit better. There are some places that can do that. Shortstop for starters. They need to figure that whole thing out. Nick Allen has been a very nice fielding shortstop, but that's a place where the Braves, I think, can look and see where to upgrade there. You're loving what you saw from Michael Harris II. There's no two ways about that. You had serious questions about him at least halfway through this year. So to see what he's been able to do in the second half, and I know he's cooled off here over the last week or so, but at the rate that he was burning, it looked like he was going to be able to put together a season that would have made you forget about that entire first half. And maybe that's asking too much, but to be able to show progress, to be able to show adjustments, to be able to get back to being the player you feel like you can be, you needed to see that as well. And I think the Braves needed to see Chris Sale get back on the mound. I know Chris Sale has said, you heard it on this show, he has expectations of himself as a competitor to get back out there. Not just look at the standings and say, well, I could pitch again this year, but I'm just not going to because the games don't mean anything. I feel like that's an argument that we've heard for different iterations about this. Well, why is Spencer Strider still pitching? These games don't mean anything. Why is Ronald Acuna Jr. playing if these games don't mean anything? They do mean something to the players and to the team. Unfortunately, they don't mean as much as they have meant in years past in the big picture scheme for the Braves and what they hope to accomplish in a given baseball season. But if you just start yanking your best players and your most talented players or your most important players off the field because you don't feel like you can win that week, that month, that year, I think it sends a terrible message to the team. I think it sends a terrible message to the fan base because I don't know if you need me to tell you this, but I will anyway. You can't manage away from an injury. If that was possible, if you could do that, I can tell you there's 30 clubs that would line up to figure out how you pulled that sorcery off. Because even when you try to mitigate it, and there's a case to be made for risk management, we're not asking people to run through brick walls on September the 27th when you're 20 games out of first place. But the fact that you're expected to be out there and playing and that you expect that of yourself as a competitor, I just don't know why we keep having that conversation. And it's gotten a little quieter lately, but it just seemed to be. We got into the second half, saw the Braves struggle mightily. They lost a handful of series that really, the season was not headed in the direction they wanted to, but when they couldn't figure out how to win consistently, you kind of knew what August and September were going to be. And it's something that the Braves are not particularly used to, and that thing is called playing out the string. Is that what the Braves were going to have to do? Well, we found out the answer to that question. But does that mean that they should put everybody in bubble wrap till next spring? No, it doesn't mean that. And that's just not a thing clubs do. I don't care, really what the optics are behind making the decision to do that or forwarding the idea of doing that. Clubs just aren't built that way. Discretion can be the better part of valor for guys who are fighting major injuries, and it's a risk for them to push themselves too far too fast. I think that's why you saw Ronald Acuna Jr. this time around get that extra couple of months. Rather than pushing him back on opening day or 3 weeks into the season, they kind of figured out a way to work him at a better speed, a different speed, to try to get him as close to full strength as you can be so that he would be set up to really make the most of this season for him. Because he knew it was going to be a challenge because we saw exactly what he went through back in 2022. Came back a little soon. Didn't play like the Ronald Acuna Jr. we're accustomed to seeing, but that has not been the case here in 2025. So, I don't know. There's a lot that you can get out of the final few weeks of this season. It's just not what you wanted to get out of the final few weeks of the season. That's kind of the story of the 2025 Braves. We got a lot to discuss on this show, and we will get into a lot of that. The return of Chris Sale, as I mentioned, that was a highlight of an otherwise kind of dreary weekend or 4-game series against the Philadelphia Phillies that started out on the wrong side of history, unfortunately, with Kyle Schwarber's 4-homer game and a monster slugfest win for the Phillies. And then the Braves kind of got back to doing that thing they were doing in the first half, and that's losing one-run games. There's nothing fun about that. But you got to see Chris Sale back out there. You got to see a fairly good performance from Bryce Elder as well because they're going to be dependent on him down the stretch. We'll talk a lot about what this rotation looks like, maybe what it won't look like in some cases as the Braves close out this final few weeks of the season. I'll also catch up with Ryan Spilborghs. He was in Philadelphia on the call for Apple TV for the Braves and the Phillies on Friday Night Baseball. To kind of get his thoughts on what's gone wrong with the Atlanta Braves this year and what exactly the Phillies are going to do as they look to push forward in their season and accomplish their goal of going as far as they possibly can, but doing that without Zach Wheeler. That's a huge question mark, and you don't need me to tell you that, but again, I'm here for it, and I'll do it. But the Philadelphia Phillies, for all that they have as an offense, I think they've got some pitching questions, and I think taking Wheeler out of the equation, well, that makes it just that much more difficult for this club. But I'll talk to Ryan Spilborghs after a while on the show. When we come back, we'll kind of dive into some of the good stuff that happened this week on the pitching front from not only Chris Sale, but also Spencer Strider. You need to see a little bit of that as well. A lot to get to. This is From the Diamond. I'm Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
with From the Diamond. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday. Braves closing out their weekend in Philadelphia, a 4-game series against the Phillies, and needing a win behind the rookie Hurston Waldrep is where the Braves found themselves after getting blown out in that first game as Kyle Schwarber hit not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 home runs and had a chance for 5, by the way, as the Phillies just thumped the Braves, 19-4 in the opener. Then a couple of 1-run losses followed that. But you kind of know how the weekend has gone from the box scores if you're still following along at this point. I know I've been told on social media that it's football season, as if I didn't know that. We do like to finish baseball season, though. I'm a big fan of that. I don't know if this is weird or not, but I'm one of those people that likes more than one sport. It's crazy. I'm also a person that likes more than one movie, more than one TV show, more than one form of entertainment. It's wild. Anyway, we're going to finish up baseball season. It's obviously not the note that the Braves wanted to finish the season on, but over the course of this weekend, there was one little thing, at least one little thing, that makes you feel a little bit better about the Braves pitching staff, and that's the return of Chris Sale. He was back on the mound on Saturday after spending 2.5 months on the IL, thanks to a freak fluke injury suffered in mid to late June, when he cracked a couple of ribs, diving to field a ball in the ninth inning, trying to close out a shutout of what at that time was a pivotal series for the Braves, because they were hoping that was going to be the moment, that sweep, that 3-game sweep of the New York Mets, where the Braves might turn their season around, because they had done it before in June. They had kind of dug themselves a bigger hole this year, and obviously we know how things went after the Sale injury. It was a Spencer Schwarber injury. And, oh, by the way, they had already lost 2 starting pitchers before that, and Reynaldo Lopez and A.J. Smith-Shawver, and then for good measure, throw in Grant Holmes about a month after that, who is also out for the year. So the entire starting rotation was down, but getting Chris Sale back in there. And we'll talk about Spencer Strider and the opportunity he has in front of him over the final month as well, to kind of right the ship and get himself a little bit of momentum heading into what we hope is a normal winter. This is the same for Sale, by the way. And into spring training feeling like they just don't have the lingering questions about what they didn't finish in 2025. But Sale, a success on Saturday, even in a loss. And I know that's, kind of a weird thing to say, but he allowed 1 run across 6 innings, struck out 9 batters, and he just looked like he hadn't missed a day. He made the 3 rehab starts in Gwinnett. He had the live BP, some bullpen sessions obviously building up to that. So the Braves didn't rush him back off the 60-day IL. Even though he's been eligible for a little while, it was about getting him the proper amount of innings so they could get him up to the pitch count where he could hopefully help the Braves cover 5 or 6 innings. And he did that, and then some, with 6 really strong innings on Saturday. Again, the Braves came up short in extra innings, but this was an important item on the checklist for Chris Sale, the very, very, very avid competitor who wanted to, at least, as in his words, finish the season upright, not on the injured list, and get into the winter and just have that normal offseason so he can get ready for the next year. And no one is under the assumption, just to go back to this for a moment, that Sale's return is something that will lead to a miraculous final month. But the importance of building up for 2026, that's what Chris Sale was looking to do, and this was a very good step in that direction. And he was having a remarkable season yet again. I mean, as if the Triple Crown year last season when he won his first Cy Young, which still to me is crazy, because just looking at Chris Sale's career, you would think, oh yeah, he's won a Cy Young or 2. No, first one came last year. But after winning the Triple Crown a season ago, so leading the National League in ERA and wins and in strikeouts, he was leading the National League was second in the National League in ERA at 2.52 and was third in the National League with nearly 12 strikeouts per 9. I mean, this was a guy who was making his case yet again as one of the premier and predominant and Cy Young favorites in the National League, only to have injury take that off course. And ultimately, that plus the Spencer Schwarber injury, which happened 10 days later, really took the Braves off course. But from the time Chris Sale got hurt, how about this, which was June 18th, the Braves went on to lose 23 of their next 33 games and fall 19 games under 500. That's their season high, and that's the lowest the Braves have been as far as under 500 since the end of the 2017 season, which was the tail end of the rebuild. That is not a thing that Chris Sale or the Atlanta Braves wanted to be talking about in 2025, let me assure you. But it was a 1-2 punch with Sale and with Schwarber that really were not one but 2 nails in that coffin for the Braves season, because right about that time, you looked at what the rotation was doing, and it was propping up the Braves. If there was to be any hope of making something of this season, it was probably going to be in large part on what the rotation was able to do. And when you lose 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5, which is 1 entire opening day rotation, it was going to be difficult to overcome that. Because if you remember, on this show and many others, you kind of talked about, well, you can dream a little bit on this Braves rotation because they do have Chris Sale and Spencer Schwarber and Reynaldo Lopez, and A.J. Smith-Shawver is pitching great, and Grant Holmes is a great story, and you're going to put Spencer Strider back in this mix. And you did. And it kind of took him a minute to get his feet under him, but then he still was not quite, I think back to the level he wanted to be, even with a good run of starts for about a month and a half and through the summer. August was a big-time speed bump for Spencer Strider, who was just absolutely bombed in the first handful of starts that he had. 20 earned runs, 7 home runs in 11 2/3 innings across his 3 August starts to open the month. But a very nice bounce back against the Miami Marlins with 7 innings of 1-run ball, even though he lost his 4th straight start, and he's only 5-12 on the year. I mean, these are numbers you're going to look at and think, oh, Spencer Strider just had a really bad year. But I'll tell you this, if he's able to come out of what is going to be, I think, a down year for him, a bad year for him as far as the numbers are concerned, and have his career on the right trajectory for 2026, then he's going to roll up his sleeves and do whatever he has to do for that. And case in point, he went to the Maven pitching facility and was able to improve his fastball. Now, it didn't lead to a whole bunch of strikeouts against the Marlins. He had only 4. And that followed up a couple of starts in which he was not getting the swings and misses and not getting the strikeouts that we're accustomed to seeing Spencer Strider get. But 7 efficient innings and a little bit more break, vertical break on that fastball, that's important. It got him back into, I think, the range that he was looking for. And Spencer Strider talked about this, and I wish I had a little bit more of the audio so I could hear it firsthand from him, but it was more of a, making adjustments in between starts to be ready to pitch again in 4 or 5 days. Like, that's just not the easiest thing to do, because this is a process that you work on for weeks, if not months. It's an ongoing process, a fluid situation at times. But to be able to change something and then go into a game when that's going to be the first place that you test it, it's not everybody's first choice. It's something that guys do. I mean, there's the case to be made for being able to make adjustments, because that's what baseball is, the constant game of adjustments. But it's a little bit harder than just, okay, well, I didn't pitch well last time, so I'm going to change this, and I'm going to be awesome the next time out. You hope so. You game plan for that lineup. You game plan for that team, but there's no guarantees. The other team gets a chance to swing the bat too, and that can change all your plans. But if Spencer Strider's getting right again, that's something that, the Braves and Spencer Strider very much would like to see before we get out of here for 2025. And it wasn't about velocity this last time out against the Marlins, and I don't think this was ever just if he threw harder, it would fix everything. I'm not sure that it would. Now, throwing harder could help him, definitely. But it's not the only thing that he needs, because not only was the fastball not the way that he wanted it to be, but I don't think his slider is where he wants it to be either. And as much as I heard that Spencer Strider needed to add a 3rd pitch, I don't want to hear too many people making the case that, well, as long as he throws hard, he can be a 1-pitch pitcher and just throw fastballs. You cannot. I don't care how good your fastball is. It is very difficult to do that. It's nay impossible for a starting pitcher to do that. So we're just going to put that off to the side. But some progress for Spencer Strider is good to see. But we kind of got this roster roulette, at least on the pitching staff side. We saw Chris Sale come back. We saw Strider making some progress. We won't see Schwellenbach, Lopez, or Holmes again this season, but there is an opportunity out in front of the rookie Hurston Waldrep and, to some extent as well, Joey Wentz, who was one of the many spare parts and cast-offs that the Braves have had to try out in order to cover the innings that they need to over the final couple of 3 months of the season. And that's not an easy thing to do, and we're seeing it. Because for every Joey Wentz, there's 2 or 3 others that aren't going to work out so well. And the most recent example of that is Cal Quantrill. But there's a really important opportunity, I think, for Waldrep as he continues to pitch this year to make a case to be part of the Braves' rotational plans in 2026. And if he's able to take the kind of success that he's shown, and we'll talk about him a little bit more later on in the show and what exactly is making him so good, but if he's able to pitch his way into the Braves' plans, that gets you feeling a little bit better, even better, about that rotation heading into the winter and really sizing things up, especially if you feel like you've gotten positive progress with Spencer Schwellenbach, who I talked to about nearly a week and a half ago, about his goal to be pitching off the mound before he heads home for the offseason. Same thing for Reynaldo Lopez. Both of those guys are in throwing programs. You got Sale, you got Strider. I think that when you get to the other side of this UCL brace procedure, it just takes time to kind of build yourself back up and feel full strength again. And this winter for Strider, I think, is going to be a critical one to rebuild that strength and to get back to where he is as a preeminent strikeout pitcher in all of baseball. But opportunity is knocking right now for Hurston Waldrep, and we'll see if he is able to do enough over the course of the rest of the year to maintain what has been one of the best stories of the Braves season. Because it is a very short list, unfortunately, and I don't have the whole list in front of me, but it's not very long. And I think at the top of the list is probably Drake Baldwin, and somewhere not too far behind that is probably Hurston Waldrep. And then you could kind of make a case for a guy here or there, but there just hasn't been the kind of stories that you would expect out of a Braves team that has as much talent as it has collected on this roster. And that's why the expectations were where they were. But over this final month, it sounds like the Braves are going to kind of ditch the 6-man rotation thing, which I always get questions about that. Well, why don't they do a 6-man rotation? Well, when you're having trouble with getting 5 guys that you can count on to start, it's even more challenging to do that 6-man staff. It just never seems to really last. There's a point to doing it at times, having that extra arm, and the Braves did it really well, I felt like, a year ago, and to some extent, I think, in 2023 as well. But they just do not have the organizational depth to be able to do it when you've got multiple starters on the 60-day IL. And I think we're also, to some extent, counting on Bryce Elder being more good than bad. Lately, you've gotten to see some pretty good stuff out of Bryce Elder. But unfortunately, we've also seen some pretty rough outings for Bryce Elder, and you kind of know what he is and where he is. And, you know, Bryce is a guy that's going to work hard. He's going to take the ball. He's going to give you everything he got. But it may not necessarily be enough to win a game on that particular day. And that, again, speaks to just how far down the depth chart the Braves are and have gotten this year. Eric Fetty, that didn't last very long. He is now signed with the Brewers. I think somebody joked with me on social media that, well, he'll be going to the postseason. Like, if Eric Fetty is pitching postseason innings, good for the Brewers. Good for them for figuring that out, because the Cardinals couldn't do it, and the Braves weren't able to figure anything out for him as well. He has been one of the statistically worst starters in Major League Baseball, unfortunately, which is what made him available for the Braves to take a chance on him anyway, and it just didn't work out. Carlos Carrasco, didn't work out. Great story, great career, but at this point, you kind of know what Carlos Carrasco was, and you can see what he's not anymore. And I think that's kind of the case for Eric Fetty, and we saw this for Cal Quantrill as well. He's not a guy that's an answer right now to the Braves' rotational needs. For the time being, he's going to hang out, I think, as a long man, but just depending on what other moves can be made, maybe the Braves will go a different direction and somebody else will pop out there and be available, because they don't have to worry about, well, when did we add this guy? Is he eligible for the postseason? That's not a thing that the Braves have to be concerned about. Unfortunately, that all had to happen for him, or for any contender, before the 31st of August, which is where we sit on a Sunday. And with that in mind, a move the Braves didn't make, but the Philadelphia Phillies did, with signing right-hander Walker Buehler. And to me, this was a move that, had the Braves done it, would have been as much about curiosity as anything else, had the Braves signed him. Because Walker Buehler very clearly is not himself anymore, that best version of Walker Buehler. And that's probably the best of the bad option starters out there, but not necessarily something the Braves had to do, and not really something the Phillies had to do either. But you'll take more pitching depth as you can get it. And when they lost Zach Wheeler, and you're well past the trade deadline, necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think that's why we've seen some of these guys get signed to begin with the Atlanta Braves, and other clubs are trying to do this as well. But the Red Sox, they're looking to win this year. They signed Walker Buehler to a $21 million contract for 1 year. Now, he was coming off Tommy John surgery. He was not great in the regular season for the Dodgers last year, but pitched really well in the World Series and in the postseason. And that kind of catapulted him into that $21 million deal, which I know a lot of people were kind of clamoring for the Braves to be in on that derby in the offseason. I wasn't really convinced that that was the move to make that would separate, that much from anybody else that the Braves already had on the roster. And I'm certainly not taking a victory lap on that, because this has been an abject just disaster for the Braves starting rotation. But Walker Buehler kind of pitched his way out of a job there, and we'll see if he's able to find something with the Phillies. But he's lost a lot of velocity, a lot of movement on his pitches as well. I mean, he's lost nearly 5 miles an hour, I think, from his first and second year in the league. And it's difficult to overcome that. And that's the riddle that I think he's trying to solve. To an extent, I think it's the riddle that Spencer Strider is trying to solve, though he has not lost nearly as much velocity as Walker Buehler has. But I digress. We don't need to talk too much about a pitcher who's not going to be throwing for the Atlanta Braves this year, but Walker Buehler did end up signing. It was an interesting conversation piece to have, but not necessarily something I expected to lead to anything big, at least this season. So Walker Buehler is off the board. Coming up, though, we're going to talk a little bit more about this Braves and Phillies series. I'm going to be joined by Ryan Spilborghs of Apple TV, of SiriusXM, and of the Rockies television broadcast. Talk a little bit more about the 2025 season that wasn't for the Atlanta Braves, and the rivalry with the Philadelphia Phillies, and everything in between. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
with From the Diamond. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as we continue dissecting the week in the weekend. It really was for the Atlanta Braves. A series win in Miami followed up by a series loss in Philadelphia. To help me break down this long-standing rivalry that unfortunately seems to be taking a bit of a year off, he is Ryan Spilborghs. He was on the call for the Apple TV broadcast on Friday. He's the host of Loud Outs with our buddy CJ Nitkowski on SiriusXM, and you can catch him on the Rockies TV broadcast as well. Ryan, appreciate you making some time to join the show. I know that when we were thinking about the Braves and the Phillies, the rivalry that's been between these two clubs the past few seasons, and the love lost, it's clearly not there. We were thinking it was going to be a lot higher stakes as we're closing out the month of August than I guess we're seeing play out this weekend.
Yeah, it's crazy too, and I'm with you. Like at the start of this year, I talk with CJ Nitkowski all the time with our Loud Out show, but I predicted a Rangers-Braves World Series. That's what I saw. I felt like, the return of Spencer Strider and Ronaldo Lopez and Chris Sale, and just looking at the team, I was like, man, I really do like the idea of the Braves being full strength and just getting back to what we saw from a couple years ago. And, in the case of the Rangers are kind of in that similar spot. I was like, ooh, I'm looking forward to seeing if he can get 25 starts from Jacob deGrom with Nathan Eovaldi and all these guys. And those two teams, and I'll throw Baltimore in there too. Yeah. Those three teams with the expectations that I had at the start of the year with their player personnel, it's been a worst case scenario. Like it's not just the Braves having a worst case scenario of a season. It's the Rangers and Baltimore too, right? So I think when the season starts and you can kind of dream on what or how good your team can be, and to be in that conversation of like, hey, I think this team can actually win a World Series and then it not go your way. Like, I'm not a Braves fan, but I would assume that this year has to rank as one of the most frustrating seasons that Braves fans have ever endured.
There's no two ways about that, and I think really it comes with expectations because I'm a guy who grew up on the Braves of the 1980s, and there was no expectation, really. I mean, you had a lot of hope, some years more so than others perhaps, but then a little something happened in the 1990s, and then our expectations became, I think, sky high for the last 35 or so years. But regardless, if we were to spend our time digging into the Braves' problems, it might just keep us here all day. That's pretty much where the discourse has gotten. First, they couldn't score enough runs to support the pitching. That put them behind the 8 ball. Now they're scoring, and they don't have enough pitching to support in order to do the things they need to do. And it really has to feel like a snake-bitten season for Atlanta on both ends of the extreme, doesn't it?
It really does. Digging into why did this happen? I got asked on our production meeting, what happened offensively to the team? And I was like, well, listen, getting out the gate and you get dinged with jerks and Profar, getting an 80-day suspension for a PED usage, which I have zero tolerance for it, but you're putting yourself already behind the 8 ball to start. And then we know injuries, right? Like from an offensive standpoint, and then waiting for Ronald Acuna to show up and be part of the lineup. Like we were just dreaming on what the lineup could possibly be, and it was the opposite. And there's individual successes that I think I've enjoyed watching, like the Drake Baldwin kid. I think that's a remarkable story. And I like we're seeing Michael Harris, like the second half, start to take off. But there's always something underlying too. When you started to think about the Braves was like, okay, they're a little bit station to station. The year that they were the buzzsaw offense, I was like, is that their baseline or was last year their baseline? Like, what is the true offensive output of this team? Because I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think from what we saw in 2023, I mean, that was ridiculous. Last year was probably where we could anticipate it. And then when he added Acuna, we thought, well, maybe you'll get like a version of 2023. And that's clearly not the case. So I think you've had regression. I think you've had injuries. I think you've had a litany of bad things happen. And then once that happens in a clubhouse, when you're having to dig yourself out of a hole and you're trying to play to numbers, that's when things get worse.
Yeah, and eventually time works against you as well. We're chatting with Ryan Spilborghs, who is on the call for the Apple TV Friday night broadcast for the Braves and the Phillies for this weekend 4-game series. You can also hear him as part of the Rockies TV broadcast and on SiriusXM with friend of the show, CJ Nitkowski, as part of the Loud Outs program weekdays at 3 p.m. He joins me on the WadeFord.com hotline here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. With all of that out of the way, I do want to kind of circle the Braves offense and tell you a couple of things that I've seen from just watching this club on an everyday basis. 2023, I don't need to tell you this, but I'll just mention it anyway. I mean, you played in Colorado. It felt like every day the Braves played, they were playing in Colorado. It was just that impressive, pretty much 1 through 9 through the order. 2024, it seemed like there was just a lot more pressure. Maybe that raised the expectations individually and collectively. Then you do throw in the injuries, and that offense, all of a sudden, you look at 2023 and see it as an outlier. Not that they aren't capable of having big seasons, but just everything seemed to go right that year. In 2024, it felt like everything seemed to go wrong, so I'm kind of with you on if you could just split the difference. You have a pretty good offense with a bunch of guys who should be in their primes, but when you put that offensive stuff that we talked about on one side of the equation, and on the other, you put an entire starting rotation from opening day landing on the 60-day IL, basically by mid-season. You played this game for a long time. You've talked about it for a long time. Have you ever seen anything quite like that?
If you start going around the league, and like I brought up Baltimore. Baltimore's lost like every pitcher that they've ever had, and then they didn't spend much in the offseason to get some frontline. But as far as like the upside of the Braves rotation, like imagine Detroit losing Tarek Skubal. That's what it was like losing Chris Sale. And then you're waiting for Spencer Strider to come back. And I thought it was a little bit unfair, assuming that when Strider was going to come back, he was going to be, top 5 Cy Young. Spencer Strider coming off, basically a second Tommy John, because what we've seen with Tommy John numbers, trying to get the spin right, it's usually the next year. So it's almost like a 3-year injury, because you have the injury, you have the rehab, the return, and then somewhat back to form in year 3. So to imagine that you're going to get Strider at the highest level, I think was short-sighted and a little bit of optimism. And then also seeing, expecting Chris Sale to be a Triple Crown Cy Young Award winner again is like a little bit of too much optimism. So I hear you when you were talking about like 2024 with the offense taking on this pressure of like, hey, we got to repeat 2023. I think in a sense that was probably felt with the pitching staff. Did I think the Braves were a top 5 rotation? Yeah, I did, which is why I kind of predicted, hey, I could see the Braves in the World Series. But I will also point out that there's teams out there like the Dodgers, unfortunately, and the Brewers, and some of these teams that have weathered significant injuries to their staff and continue to kind of plug forward.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And obviously, the season can go in waves as well. And, as far as the injuries are concerned, I mean, you did have Sale and Spencer Strider, and those were going to be 2 guys that got talked about a lot. But the loss of Spencer Schwellenbach, that was a rough one. A.J. Smith-Shawver was pitching his way, I felt like, into at least consideration for Rookie of the Year. It was very early, 9 starts, but he looked like he'd turned a corner. You lose him to Tommy John surgery. And then Grant Holmes, who was like this great feel-good story, who was just racking up strikeouts and seemed to be shoring up the back end of the rotation. He's lost to an elbow injury, and you got 1 start out of Reynaldo Lopez. So if it could go wrong, it did go wrong for those 5 guys. And now you're seeing some stories like Hurston Waldrep and Joey Wentz and whatever else you can pack in around Spencer Strider. And, of course, Chris Sale coming back could help out as well. But let me ask you a little bit about the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, Kyle Schwarber, we got to talk about him, right? Because 4 home runs in that slugfest victory in Game 1 of the 4-game series. Schwarber is having a magnificent season. Where do you see his case for the National League MVP? Because I think he's making himself a run to do something really special here over the final 5 weeks.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. First off, Ohtani last year broke the DH narrative, right? So he was a unanimous MVP as a DH. So can't argue against DH as winning MVPs anymore. Ohtani is back to pitching, but he's, like I said, with Spencer Strider, like Ohtani's pitching is still not, because he's still coming back from his internal brace. So he's not, even though he's not pitching like we've seen in years past, even though he just had 9 punch-outs in his last start. So like the argument that, hey, he's not only is Ohtani doing Ohtani things, but, like he's pitching, which makes him so much more valuable. My argument against that is he's not as valuable as you think right now as a pitcher, even though it's still like the craziest thing ever. Like we have to like marvel at it because there's not going to be another Ohtani. This is like the one that when you tell your grandkids you saw Ohtani, like it's got to stick in your mind like you saw Babe Ruth or you saw Willie Mays or, like we cannot dismiss Ohtani. We cannot have Ohtani fatigue. That being said, Schwarber has a legitimate claim for an MVP. When I start going into the numbers of, go-ahead RBIs and, how important the homers are at the time of the homer, there's a lot of weight to, the value of Kyle Schwarber. Now, there's also something beyond the field, which we can never quantify, and we can never, no sports writer can say like, hey, you know what? I voted for this guy because he really brings the team together. You can't quantify that, but that is immeasurable. And Schwarber does bring that to the table. But as far as like, your MVP based on being a good teammate, that doesn't really hold water, but it does to the team, right? So the people in that clubhouse go, hey, we play better because we have this guy on our team. Hey, we are more relaxed because we have this guy on our team. That's where the players on the Phillies can make the argument to the sports writers like, hey, if we don't have this guy, we're nowhere near the same team. And if the Phillies win the division and if the Dodgers lose the division, Padres somehow sneak in there and take it, I think the conversation becomes a lot closer than I think we will admit, right? So I'm curious to see what happens. I still think it's Ohtani's award. I mean, the numbers Ohtani's throwing up again are just stupid.
Yep.
His numbers are ridiculous. He's in the top of virtually everything. So, he's still doing these things that nobody else is doing, but Schwarber has a legit claim to an MVP.
Yeah, I believe that he does. And over this next month or so, as you said, some different things could happen in the division races, which could, of course, color the MVP cases for both of these guys. The Phillies have been at or near the top of this division all year long. They have a squad that is no stranger to October. Losing Zach Wheeler, though, that is no two ways about it, a very tough blow. Obviously, we wish him well in his recovery, but now the Phillies have to figure out how to win without him in the postseason. How difficult do you think that'll be, and who is under the most pressure to really step up and front this pitching staff?
The loss of Wheeler is catastrophic. I think if the Phillies had Wheeler, they're probably my favorite to get out of the National League. Without Wheeler, it becomes a little bit more of a crapshoot. If you have the Padres in there with their bullpen, if you have the Brewers that continue to play well, whether it's the Cubs or the Mets, there's a couple teams out there that can actually match up. Of course the Dodgers. It's going to be tight. It's going to be really, really tight. So for me, the X factor, Aaron Nola being the right-handed starter that they have, because they have three quality lefties. Nola being able to, because he's kind of battle-tested. If Nola, and my guess is by the time we get to October for Nola, who just came back, if he's getting his 95 mile an hour, 94, 95 mile an hour running fastball with his good slow breaker, he could be the X factor for the Phillies.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what some of those other lefties do as well. Christopher Sanchez has had a really nice year. The Braves have had no fun whatsoever with Ranger Suarez over the years either. Those are a couple of guys who could step up as well. But if you got three starters in the postseason of that level, and you can figure out that whole bullpen thing, which the Phillies have done some work in that regard, but they won't have Jose Alvarado for that. Some questions still to be answered for them. But, of course, you got to get there. You got to get that all figured out. The Phillies are in great shape to do that. And, unfortunately, it looks like the Braves will be doing the same thing that we're all doing, which is watching the playoffs from home this year. Ryan Spilborghs, appreciate all of your time. Let the folks know a little bit about the Apple TV broadcast. And, of course, we love listening to you with CJ Nitkowski on SiriusXM as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and we say this all the time when it comes to the Apple broadcast. We do our best to, tell the story as much as we can. Our production crew works for MLB Network. They're baseball junkies. They spend hundreds of hours, getting ready all this information and research and development and try to tell a show. And, I'm in the grind every day. I watch the Braves. I watch the Phillies. We're baseball nuts. But I also get it. Constantly, paywalls and trying to figure out where to find the game. I know it's been frustrating for a lot of fans in general as an industry-wide issue with all the different platforms. So I get it. I get why people are having a little bit of streaming fatigue.
Yeah, I can understand that as well. Again, he's Ryan Spilborghs. Appreciate all of your time and look forward to catching up with you down the line.
Thanks, Grant.
And thanks again to former big leaguer Ryan Spilborghs, a very busy man with a whole bunch of hats that he wears in the broadcast realm, for making some time for me this week on the show. When we come back, we will close out this edition of From the Diamond and look ahead at what's on the Braves' schedule. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Taking a look around the league with more of our From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. From the Diamond is brought to you by Window Nation. Get 2 windows free with every 2 you buy and pay nothing for 2 years on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley as we wrap up the weekend, wrap up this edition of the show, and a few more Braves thoughts and stats and things to get to. Before we do that, and before we set sail into the month of September, it is crazy how quickly at times this season has gone. At others, I think you've felt every possible drawn-out second of it because this has just been such a disappointing year for the Braves. And if you want to point at the one thing I think that had most people looking and wondering when it was going to correct or if it was going to correct, I think you kind of have to look at the Braves' offense. And, you know, the last couple of nights in Philadelphia notwithstanding coming into Sunday, the Braves' offense has been a top 5 in the league in runs scored. One of the top 5 teams. In fact, they were top 3 before those last couple of nights. And the past couple of games in Philadelphia did push them down 2 spots, but still averaging over 5 runs per game in the second half. Let me repeat, 5 runs per game in the second half. And again, to kind of go back to the time aesthetic we've been talking about, has it really been that long in the second half? Well, yeah, it has. Braves are playing their 42nd game of the second half on Sunday night. So, yeah. It's been a hot minute here. And so this sample size is not one of those that you can look at and just say, well, it's an aberration. You know, this is the outlier. This team hasn't really scored altogether that much. This was just one good series or one good night. That is what the entire first half felt like. It was, hey, the Braves seemed to have figured it out. And then they would be back, you know, getting run through the ringer by opposing pitchers for the next 10, 12 games. It just hasn't been that way in the second half. Not telling you that everything is fixed and all is well, because obviously you're missing a major piece in Austin Riley. You have lost Ronald Acuna Jr. to the IL for a large portion of this season before the comeback, and even again here in the second half. So just some things that have not really been able to click yet. You've had the down year from Ozzie Albies, a very Jekyll and Hyde year from Michael Harris II. Matt Olson's power has not been there as the season has worn on. That's a whole other thing that we've talked a little bit about on the show, but it's still worth monitoring. I mean, this is not the Matt Olson power profile of a couple of years ago. And I'm going to talk about Ozzie Albies' power profile and what I think is kind of ailing him and where he might be able to make that adjustment. But from some big picture stuff, I think that being able to push yourself into being one of the top 5 offenses for an extended amount of time after the struggles the Braves had to start this year, and honestly, the struggles that date back to about May of 2024, it's no small thing. So hopefully this is a building foundational piece for the Braves as they move forward. Now, is it Tim Heyer's philosophy of patience and working counts and good decision makings, is that finally sitting in? Because that, sinking in. Because that was one of the questions I think that the Braves were trying to answer was, what does Tim Heyer's do and what can his hitting staff do that they weren't accomplishing under Kevin Seitzer, because they decided to make a hitting coach change. And we always knew it was going to take a little bit of time, I think, but how much time can you afford to give it in a 162-game season? And when you saw the first, I'll say 3+ months, not really giving you anything that you didn't see a year ago, and in some cases, in Michael Harris's case, a huge regression monster that was just eating his season alive after finishing 2024 on a very high note, you just kind of wondered how long was this going to take. But Atlanta leads the National League, actually leads all of Major League Baseball in walk rate since the All-Star break. And again, that's 40-plus games at this point. They were 10th in the first half. And Atlanta is one of the most patient teams in baseball. That, I think, portends well to the future of an offense that would like to score more runs because, if you have more base runners, you get the opportunity to score more runs. So the walk rate is not a small deal. The Braves went from 24th in Major League Baseball in runs scored in the first half to 5th overall in runs scored in the second half. I just see a correlation there. And sure, they're hitting some more home runs. And overall, they're getting a lot more hits with runners on base, which was a huge problem the first 3 months as well. But this walk rate thing is certainly trending in the right direction. The Braves were 16th in walk rate in 2024. So I view this, again, as progress because typically more base runners can end up scoring you more runs. A step in the right direction. And I think this is in line with all the tenets that we heard from hires back in spring training. And also, we know that Kevin Seitzer couldn't get through to these guys last year because he told Dave O'Brien of The Athletic about this earlier this year. And so much of the self-imposed performance anxiety and pressure that these guys were dealing with, it's just not something that a hitting coach is going to be able to solve because you go up to the plate by yourself. You can do all the work. You can go to the hitting lab. You can spend all the time in the cage. You can take all the extra BP. But ultimately, it's going to come down to you and the pitcher, typically 4 encounters a night, and typically not the same pitcher as well. So there's a degree of just, discipline, I think, that comes with it, commitment that comes with it, and you hope that those things, through the work ethic, are able to turn into results for the Braves. And perhaps in some ways it's starting to, just based on, again, the runs scored and the fact that this has become a bit of a more patient lineup than we have seen, especially than the one we saw a year ago. Now, Ozzie Albies, a big question, obviously, is around his future with the Braves. It once seemed like an absolute no-brainer that Ozzie Albies was going to be around not only through the contract years that he signed, but those option years as well. The Braves have a $7 million option for Albies in 2026 and another $7 million option for him in 2027 with what was called at the time by Jeff Passan and others as maybe the worst contract ever signed in baseball history. As it has turned out, while the Braves got a supreme amount of value in the first few years of that deal, the last couple of years especially has been a big-time struggle and lead to the question marks of, can Ozzie Albies get his career back on track? So I did some digging into some of the issues that Ozzie's dealing with, and I don't pretend to tell you that this is everything that you need to know, but I think that it does speak to what we've seen in terms of the quality of contact that Ozzie is making or not making. And over the past couple of years, his launch angle has gone down from 16-ish degrees to over 18 degrees. Or I guess you could say it's gone up, depending on how you want to look at that. But anyway, there's been a major change. Now, if you look at the 2023 Ozzie Albies, who did have that pristine 16-degree launch angle, which has been right around where his best seasons have been, and by best seasons, I mean 30-plus homers, 40-plus doubles, 100 runs batted in, 100 runs scored, the things that Ozzie Albies did that brought supreme value, not just for that contract, but at that position as well. We haven't seen that in 2024. We didn't really see that in 2022, and we're not seeing it in 2025, at least not consistently speaking. So when he changed the launch angle, it changed, I think, his barrel rate, among other things. And barrels, of course, are when you hit the ball squarely on the sweet spot, exactly where you want to hit the ball, just to make a long story short. You can spend more time than I did on Baseball Savant on the StatCast page if you want to get a little bit more out of this. But his barrel rate is his worst this year since his rookie season. So I think there's some work to be done there. I think it's just going to be the angle, obviously, and trying to get that consistent hard contact and put it with good swing decisions. And he has an opportunity to fix what's ailing him. But that is a lot of hard work. It's a lot to accomplish. Not always the easiest thing to do. And amidst the season, I think Michael Harris showed us that. But it's something that he's going to have to do if he wants to get his career back on track, because I still think the talent is in there. It's just how's he going to tap back into it. And one other little piece of business, though, that I thought was, from a historical perspective, quite interesting. Kyle Schwarber's 4 home runs, having a chance at 5, becoming just the 21st player in Major League history to do that in a single game, and doing so against Atlanta for the second time this year. Remember, Eugenio Suarez did this back in April with 3 of those against Grant Holmes. The Braves have been involved in a third of the 4 homer games in Major League Baseball history. I thought this was fascinating. So 21 times it's happened. 7 times it's either been for the Braves or against the Braves. 3 times the Braves have done it. You had Bobby Lowe in 1894. That's the first documented 4-homer game in baseball history for the Boston Beaneaters. Joe Adcock for the Milwaukee Braves in 1954, and then Bob Horner, of course, in 1986. On the flip side, some Hall of Famers did it against the Braves. Gil Hodges in 1950 for the Dodgers. Willie Mays for the Giants against the Milwaukee Braves in 1961. And then you had Suarez and Schwarber, who both did it in 2025, which, from a dubious fact, is the first time that a team has allowed 2 players in the same season to hit 4 home runs against them. So if that's not the most 2025 Braves stat, I don't know what is. But that is going to bring us to the end of our time here on From the Diamond. I want to thank Ryan Spilborghs for making the time for me to discuss the Braves and Phillies. Make sure you follow him on SiriusXM, among other places. I want to thank my producer, Josh, for his great work keeping the show going again tonight, and to all of you for making From the Diamond part of your weekend as well. We'll be back with you soon here on 92.9 The Game for more Braves and baseball talk. And until then, I'm Grant McAuley. This has been From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app. So long, everyone.